Hey, what's up guys? In this video I'm going to be starting a new tutorial series. This one is on Ozone 8, which is pretty exciting. Ozone is a all-in-one mastering plugin suite that will make your tracks sound great and sound good commercially, and it will stand up against other tracks. Basically, it's a way to take the final mix of everything and polish it and add a sheen, I've heard people describe, make it louder, uh, kind of tame the dynamics, glue it together, and make it sound like one big thing. And yeah, it does an excellent job at that. And yeah, this video is going to be about the UI and workflow because I got the intro out of the way. So this is what it looks like. How it works is you have your plugins up here, and you can add and take them away as well. And what happens is this is processed in series, so the signal goes from left to right. So that's one of the workflows. It's not like all going in and then going out to these separately and it being summed. Equalizer goes into dynamics, into maximizer, vintage tape, etc., etc. You can move things around, and that is all of that. And yeah, so I'll just delete all these, and we can see all of our plugins, all of our modules down here. I'll call them modules. And yeah, you can select to drag them in, and that's all well and good. You can only have a maximum of, I think, 6. You only have 1 at a time, which isn't a bummer because you have them all individually as plugins as well. So you can build your own Ozone 8 chain for that, which works out quite well. So we're going to be going through all these a little bit later. Starting up here, this is new. You have the ability to name the instance, which is very important. So I'm going to call this Ozone Master. And this is very useful, and I'll explain why later. I'm going to be doing a Neutron 2 video as well. Ozone 8 talks to Neutron 2, and you have cool things like tonal balance control and all that fun stuff, and the visual mixer, which we'll get into. But that's a different series, which I'll be starting soon after this one. You have your master assistant, which I will get into. It will assist in mastering. And this is the track we're going to be mastering, by the way. And yeah, just a basic little thing. There's some problems in it, and we're going to be fixing that. You have your presets here, and you can go through any of those and save your own and stuff like that. You can have show it startup if you want. That's all well and good, and you can cycle through your presets. You have an undo and an undo history. Then you got your options and your help and all that. Here you have your input meter and adjustment, input gain left and right. So you can adjust the input gain, which is useful in certain situations, especially if you're using like vintage tape and things like that. And then you have your output gain, which is, on the output. I wouldn't touch this, and we'll explain that when we get to the maximizer / vintage limiter. You have a global bypass, so you can bypass everything to kind of do an A/B, like what it sounds like before and after. You have the gain match, which will automatically adjust the gain, matching the limiter. So you're hearing like the changes and not like loudness, because our ears have like this thing where we think louder sounds sound better. It'll keep things uniform, which is good. And yeah, sorry. This is the mono. I didn't know what that was. That's a weird thing. Yeah, it's a mono, so you can test it in mono. You can have this on, toggle mono on and off. You can load in a reference. You can dither as your final step, which could be important. And then you have your codec preview, which is pretty neat. You can kind of, Ozone can guesstimate what it'll sound like when you upload it to SoundCloud or something like that. The SoundCloud is like, I think it's 192, so you can hear what that sounds like. You can even solo the artifacts, right? And yeah, test things out that way, which is pretty useful. And turn them on and off with this thing here. And yeah, let's just delve into the options just for a sec. You got general like show meters, all this sort of thing. Yeah, you can set your loudness target, which is for a different video. Spectrum. Peak hold time, how long you want the spectrum to last for, window size, the resolution of it, real time. I leave things as they are, just for the sake of, ease. And I think how it is by default is pretty good. Hybrid crossover type for the the multiband dynamics, very useful. And the I/O, you can have the metering type RMS, which I think starting out you should stick to, but you can change that to RMS only integrated, so you can really like dial in your loudness, meter scale, change that. A lot of options here. Meters for stereo, and your peak hold time, so you can see what's going on. And then you can check your version number if you want. So yeah, that is Ozone. We're going to be delving into basically everything about this plugin. And yeah, we're going to be kind of mixing a track, or sorry, mastering a track, and doing some fun stuff. So yeah, I hope you stick around. Hope you are learning stuff. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up guys? In this video we are going to be going over the equalizer modules in Ozone 8. And you'll notice that we have our EQ here, and then our EQ here. So we got equalizer and post EQ. Nothing is different between these two. One is that just, you get two EQs. They can even operate like interchangeably. So what this suggests, and the use case of this is, say, you have your equalizer and you're going to kind of correct errors, adjust things, roll off the low end, things of that nature. And then you're going to want to, I don't know, add some tape, add, I guess, some dynamics, maybe have dynamics going into tape. That might make a little more sense. And an imager, let's just do that. And then you're going to want to EQ again, right? A post EQ, because you're making all these changes and adding harmonics and doing things like that. And yeah, so that's why there's a post EQ here. So you can EQ before, for example, you drive it into the maximizer. So yeah, we're going to kill two birds with one stone. And we're going to be just going over an equalizer, which also goes over the post EQ. So this is the equalizer. And there's two modes down here. There's analog and then there's digital. Analog, basically, it emulates classic analog EQs. It adds coloring, but the coloring is pleasing. And, a lot of cool things here, the analog vintage and different kind of filter cutoffs here. And then we have our digital, which introduces, well, it's digital. It's more precise. You have what's called surgical mode, and then you have your phase percentage, which I will get into. So let's go to analog first. All right, so this is your main window here. We have our track. Right, there's a few different views here. This one is the one we are currently in. We can have a full-on view here. If you want to bring more of it in, this is the default, which will display, all of our bands. And yeah, that's how you enable them. You kind of click on this guy to turn them on and off. We can also just turn all of them off. So we just have one here, which is, a pretty lonely EQ. It's more of like just a basic single filter. And then we have this guy here, which might be useful for some people. You can directly dial in the frequency you want to affect and the gain if you want to work in it that way. If you like to look at numbers, I like this one right here, and that's all well and good. The same information is displayed here. So we have a couple of filters to go over. We have a high pass, which basically, I just did something just out of muscle memory. What did I do there? I changed the cutoff. So we have a few cutoff options here in the analog mode: 6 dB per octave, 12 dB per octave. 24 and 48. These can be expressed in poles as well. 4-pole, 2-pole, 1-pole, and then 60. I don't really know. Anyway, I'm not going to pretend to know what that is, but yeah, it's just steepness. This will reflect steepness of the cutoff. It's basically, yeah, how hardcore the cutoff is. And you can also mouse wheel by hovering over this guy, or you can just drag these two things and move that. And that's how you adjust your cutoff. So let's do something steep, and let's roll something off at around 30 hertz or something. Or maybe even more so you can hear what's going on. Right, and that is an analog high pass. It is flat, so each filter has several options. You can have flat, you can have resonant, which adds a bit of a bump. Might not sound too good on our material, but it adds a bit of a bump, and that emulates analog gear. And then you have brick wall, which is like, a very precise cutoff. It's like infinite Q, and you can't even adjust that. What this does is this basically cuts off everything below a certain point. Well, almost everything. This could work well if you have like a lot of information below 30 hertz, but it's kind of overkill, but it's there. And I remember way back when only the Cambridge EQ could do this. It was very intensive and kind of tricky to do without phasing issues. But yeah, let's just stick with flat. 6 dB per octave roll off might work well. Just a gentle roll off we can bypass as well. It really cleaned up that low end, and don't worry if it's a little bit too much. This is all for practice and demonstration. So yeah, there's that high pass. The digital high pass is a little bit different, but not really. It just doesn't add color, and the brick wall's a little bit more kind of flat because you're trying to avoid phasing issues. Nowadays, and this is a different kind of conversation about the phase. So what happens here is I'll just mouse over it. So at 0% is linear phase, and 100% it's minimum phase. So if you're really curious about it, Fab Filter did a really good video about linear and minimum phase. I suggest you watch that. They can explain it way better than me. But yeah, it's kind of hard to, what's happening is the phase is being inverted at the cutoff point, and it can be delayed slightly and could cause smearing. It's not something that you need to really worry about starting out, but it is there. Mind you, everything is going to add color. Any kind of EQ change you're doing is going to take away something and then add something, and it's all about that compromise. So yeah, don't stress too much about phase, but FabFilter has a really good video that explains all this. So yeah, let's move on. So yeah, I want to go back to analog. Analog cutoff, maybe 24 dB per octave, or maybe, no, I'll go back to 6. This is about right. Right, smooths out that. You have a few different options here. I'll just go to our EQ2. This one is a bell. I'll change this to low shelf. Low shelf is really interesting because it's kind of self-explanatory. I'll just show you what that looks like just by itself. It's a low shelf. So it's not a hardcore filter cutoff. It just kind of goes down and it's like that. And this is useful. I really like shelves because what they do is they're just useful to kind of shift the balance of your music. So say if you're a little bit too high heavy, you can kind of shift it. Just it tilts it. It's like a tilting kind of EQ, and it's really useful. And you have different shapes. Got vintage ones which add a bump. Vintage stuff always adds bump, and this is where that kind of rule comes from. Where if you lower something, kind of like this, a little bit before the cutoff point, you should boost as well. And I guess that's where that rule came from. That's what I've always kind of heard. And it kind of makes things sound nicer and more cohesive. Different kind of math, essentially. This one is a little bit more smooth, I guess, and resonant, which kind of does that. So same rule. You kind of take away a bit more and you boost up here, which kind of keeps the balance, so to speak. Anyway, so let's turn band 1 back on. Easy as that. And yeah, let's kind of do that. And then low pass, kind of self-explanatory. Let's just add a low pass. And what I want to do is those hi-hats are a little bit too intense. So a gentle 6 dB per octave analog low pass. Very gentle. And then I'm going to bypass and unbypass so I can hear and you can hear what's going on. Right? this is the first stage in mastering. I'm taking away so I can accentuate later. I'm just trying to like just kind of chill out the signal a little bit using a very high quality filter. And yeah, so let's go and select another band. How about that? So I want this to be a little bit more surgical, and I'm going to be using the digital EQ, and I'm going to use the bell. Perfect. And I'm going to adjust the Q that way. You'll notice that the digital Q doesn't have the numbers. It's kind of linear, right? This our high pass we're using to roll off the low end has 6, 12, 25. They're set values, right? But the band 3 isn't a set value, and this is kind of exceptionally important to notice with digital EQs is it's digital. It's like not reliant on transformers and capacitors, and it's not popping out the back of a mixing desk. It's actually, digital. And you can get really surgical with it, even with the surgical mode on. The surgical mode is more of an extreme cut. So if you have like something crazy going on, you can adjust that. But for the sake of, if you have to be using surgical stuff, you might want to go back in your mix and figure some things out. But yeah, let's just roll around and find anything that might be poking out. Oh, so what I'm doing there is I'm alt clicking, and I can solo that part there. And that's a good way to kind of figure out what's going on. So let's leave that because we'll save that for the next step. That is our EQ. So from here, I'm going to explain the two other modes of EQing. And let's just open up the post EQ. They gave us two EQs for a reason. And right now we've been working in just stereo EQ. So it takes, the left and the right and merges them together, and we're affecting them both at the same time. Right, I'll turn that to a high pass so we can hear. Right, and that's all well and good, but there's two other options here, which is pretty neato. We have our stereo section, which we're in, and then we have our MS, mid and side, right? And this gets to be a little bit, not confusing, but it's actually fun. So mid and side is kind of an independent processing of the stereo material and the mono material. Just think of it that way. A technical way to explain it is you're taking mathematically the difference between the left and the right, and then processing that differently from the similarities between the left and the right. So I hope I didn't lose you. So right now we're in mid mode. We're taking out the mids, right? Right now we're hearing the majority of what we're hearing is the side material. Pretty spooky, right? So what this allows is you have control over the stereo image, which is pretty neat, and you can adjust it, or you can adjust it here, mid and side. And just the side here, or the mid, things like that. Basically turns into two EQs. So what is very common is you don't want a lot of side material to be accumulating in the low end because then you get phasing. It's not that pleasant. Alright, so I'll solo this. Right now I'm only listening to the side material. Or I can like boost a little bit of the high end here, right? There's no rules. All right, so that is that. We'll go to mid. Solo the mid. This is not necessarily the mono signal. This is just the mids. Like mid as in the similarities between the left and the right, summed together. right, so I'm adjusting the tonality of the mix of the master just by using mid-side mode. So there's that. Let's bypass and see what we've done. All right, I might have went a little too crazy, but whatever. Right, and that is the EQ. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed, hope you learned stuff. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up, guys? In this video, we are going to be going over the vintage EQ in Ozone 8. It is right here, and this emulates the Pultec style of EQs. This is a very old unit. It's about 60 years old, and basically, it's the difference between like a conventional, well, like an equalizer you'll run across a lot in the digital world. It's a little bit different. So there's set frequencies. So these numbers are like 5,000 hertz, 8,000 hertz, and you boost kind of accordingly. The boost and the Q changes depending on the boost, and these particular frequencies were chosen because that's just kind of what you wanted to adjust back then to kind of adjust the tonal balance of the whole thing. I could get into that. It's more of a console style EQ way of working, but and I think I went over this in my last kind of tutorial series. The special part about the vintage EQ is its effect on the low end. So basically, what made the units kind of famous, and this is true with a lot of things, using things in a way that they're not meant to be used. You could either boost or cut the low end, and you can adjust those at the same time. The manufacturer and the manual said don't do this, but people kind of did anyway, and you can simultaneously boost and cut at the same time. So when you boost, it's kind of an analog style shelf, and then it kind of boosts up that way. So it's a really interesting curve. You notice around this area, it kind of changes the curve, and that's typical of analog gear. And the low cut here is kind of the same deal. So if you use both of these at the same time, you boost and then you have a little bit of a dip. And if someone's been, if you've been watching my videos for quite some time, I usually do this on the low end. And that's just how I was raised. And this kind of adds an exceptional kind of low end feel to it, which I'll demonstrate right now. That's a little bit exaggerated, and there's a lot of low end here already, but this is a way to really adjust the low end. You see, notice what it does? Pretty cool. It adds like an interesting kind of shelf, and if that looks familiar, the same one is in here, resonant. Right, that one right there, kind of boost and then cut at the same time. Same dealio, right? But, a little bit more analog looking, I guess. That's how you want to describe it. And this is a way to add, warmness, I guess, from cutting and stuff like that. You can boost particular frequencies and add a bit of warmness, kind of accentuate things in the old school way. So with that being said, that's the vintage EQ. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned stuff. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up, guys? In this video, we are going to be going over the vintage tape module in Ozone 8. Open it up right here. There it is. And vintage tape is a tape machine emulation. And why do you want to use tape machine? Well, tape machine does a few things when you bounce your audio to it. It adds some saturation, which is, analog warmness, and it adds a subtle kind of compression to it. And that's the reason why kind of tapes have become like the soup of the day They've become kind of like this holy grail of emulation just because they're so difficult to emulate. There's a lot of moving parts, literally. There's the speed of the machine, linear characteristics, the tape head, the other tape head, the dust that's on it, the guy drinking coffee standing in the room. There's a lot of things going on. And, how the audio is printed to like magnetic or whatever oxide the tape is made out of, Smurf juice or whatever. There's a lot of things going into vintage tape, and vintage tape people love because it adds subtle saturation and compression, and to nail those two things at once, I assume is you know very difficult to do and have it sound kind of musical as well. And tape is, analog stuff is very subjective, and it really depends on what the material is. Anyway, I can go on for days. I don't own any tape, by the way, full disclosure. So this is a vintage tape, and it's kind of a stripped down kind of thing. There's no, spinning tape reels or anything like that. It's the options that you want to look at in the digital realm. So what you have here is you have tape speed. It's the speed that the tape is going through the tape head. So, right, 30 is fast, 30 whatever per second. So 30 is faster, 15, and then 7.5. So naturally, you'd think that the slower speeds would add a little bit more saturation because there's not enough data on the tape to write to. And so just keep that in mind, depending on what you're going for. 15 can be lo-fi, 30 can be, higher quality. And what do I do when I mouse over it? Modifies frequency response of the wavelength. Yeah, there you go. So what this means is like lower frequencies will distort more as more and more. That's the thing about tape is like the higher frequencies will distort faster than the lower frequencies. So it's like a nonlinear kind of distortion. And that's what everyone has a fetish about these days. So there's that. And then you have your input drive, which is how much you're feeding into the tape. And what this does is this gives you more of a, it gives you more saturation. And remember, the higher frequencies distort faster than the lower ones, as far as I know. I could be completely wrong. That's the input drive that controls that, right? The bias controls, what does it say? Applies the character. So it modifies the frequency dependent non-linearity. What the heck does that mean? Well, let's demonstrate. And I'll demonstrate it first, and then I'll explain it to you. So when the bias is all the way down, the higher frequencies will distort more than the lower frequencies. When it goes up, the lower frequencies will distort before the higher ones. This is tape bias. I'm not sure quite how you set this on a hardware unit, but it's an option in a lot of these tape emulations. I'm not an expert in tape. I'm an 80s kid, 87 word. So there's that. So if you want to kind of adjust the character of the distortion, there you go. Harmonics, what this does is boost harmonics. It adds harmonics into the tape distortion. So you get like that tape kind of saturation type of thing. Keep in mind that tape is also a compressor, and that's what people like about it. It's not so much the saturation, because you can just run things through, the things that you run audio through, and it won't sound like tape. Tape is a compressor as well. So let's go over something called tape bump. And this is something really cool that tape does. And this is what makes it exceptionally useful for me, is you have this low emphasis, and it will control the tape head bump. It basically boosts the low end. And right now it's set to the default value of 2.0. Right, it can add some low-end character to your sound. And that is the bread and butter, in my opinion, of this particular module, Ozone 8. Just adding low-end that just sounds tapey, I guess. All right, and then you have your high emphasis. You can boost the high end depending on what bias setting you have. So if you have a low bias, you're losing a lot of the high end. So check this out. Or whatever. You can emphasize the highs and stuff like that. Before, I think this is, on the post, I believe. It would have to be after the tape, and yeah, it just sounds nice and neat. So yeah, that is tape. It's a way to kind of make the whatever you're mastering sound a bit more cohesive. It's also a way to add some low end. You'd have tape after maybe some compression, maybe a bit of dynamics, and doing some things, and then you'd want to bounce to tape afterwards. You bounce to tape after all the EQing and stuff. Bounce it to tape. That's a term. You're not actually bouncing anything. You're just having it, the second last thing in your chain here, and then you'd add a maximizer, and then there you go. And there's that, and that is tape. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up, guys? In this video, I'm going to be going over the Exciter in Ozone 8. The Exciter is a multiband coloration tool, I like to call it. And when I mean like coloration means that when like a signal comes out of a piece of gear, namely a piece of analog gear, it colors it. It kind of changes it. And a good example is like, dry electric guitar going into an amplifier. Even if there's no distortion, no saturation or anything, everything's on low, there's still like color. Like it colorizes it. It makes it sound, like warm, vintage, bright, dark, whatever. It colorizes it. And this is what the Exciter is doing. So I'm going to kind of make it easy for everyone. I'm going to click this little X here, and right now there's only one band, so it's just a single band Exciter. And what you have here is you can have up to 4, and you can add them back by doing this, and this is your crossover point, and that's useful, and I'll get into why in a momento. Basically, you have different styles that you're running the audio through. So you got like analog color, and you can adjust the amount. Right, it affects it. You can get something a little more, I guess, aggressive with retro. Right, that doesn't sound too great, and the reason why is it's affecting all bands. It's affecting the whole track. And the idea of having a multiband is you can have, say, an effect affecting the higher end, but then leaving the lower end alone, because you don't want to affect the low end too much, because that's a lot of where like the body of the track lies. You could, add another one here, another band, which would be band 3, and you could use retro to kind of boost the hi-hats, giving it a bit of flavor, I guess, or color, or another term that we tend to make up to describe what we're doing to sound. So yeah, there's retro. Tape. Tape is it's a little bit more brighter than the rest. Tube, it's kind of tonal. If that makes any sense. Tube it's easy to kind of distort, but it's a quote unquote warmer distortion. And maybe I'll do a video on this a little bit later, but it's even and odd harmonics, which contribute to the sound. And then you have, warm, which it generates even harmonics only, which is pretty cool. And then you have triode and then dual triode, which is tube gear, essentially. Triode is using only one side of the tube. Dual triode is using both sides of the tube, which it produces more overdrive. So yeah, so you can use and just experiment. But what I do is, a general rule of thumb is less is more. And if you split these guys up kind of gently across frequency bands, that makes sense. Or I just close it, and then I open up the one that is the default. This is a good starting point. So like the low end, we can just solo that. It's a good way to kind of listen and take a listen to what's going on. And I can do that, and I can be like, hey, what's going on here? Oh. Maybe this might benefit. I'll just select that or whatever, or go down here, which is the blue. it is my benefit by a bit of tape, just a tiny bit of tape. Right, less is more. And then maybe this guy up here, I'll solo it. Right, maybe this could benefit from maybe something a little more warm, maybe like a triode. Just to add a little bit of high end, but not like an EQ boost, which would cause like ringiness and things of that nature. You want the triode or like harmonics to kind of boost things. You know, you want to add extra harmonics, not boost ones that are already there, if that makes any sense. And then this part right here, maybe we can just add a bit of tape and then just be done with it. Which tape is a bit of a compression. Tape is also a compressor as well. So there's that. Oversampling basically boosts it oversamples it, so it converts it from whatever your project settings is mine. I guess mine's like 44.1. Then oversamples that, doubling it, and then that basically makes sure that you don't get anything called aliasing when you're using distortion and adding harmonics on the higher end, closer to the Nyquist limit. Typically, yeah, you're going to want to use, the best quality that you can for oversampling, unless you're, unless you're running at a CPU power. It's not that much of a hit. But yeah, have that on. It's all well and good. And yeah, we should always strive to have like the highest quality possible. Also, I forgot to mention that we have mix amounts here. So say if I wanted to do something gosh darn aggressive, I can actually take that out and then mix it in slowly. So I'll still get those like heavy harmonics, but it's not as pronounced, but they're still there, kind of thing. That might be an extreme example, so I won't do that. So right now, yeah, like before, in our EQ, we can process the stereo or process the mid and the side separately, which I think is like a super awesome, useful tool. So say if you want like the sides to be a little bit more like present or something, you want to do something cool with the stereo mix, you'd take the sides and you'd kind of boost those a bit. And that might add like a nice kind of stereo image to your track, to the tune you're working on. Yeah, the possibilities are pretty good. Important thing is less is more. It's easier to get carried away doing this thing because you're just like, I can't hear it. But when mastering and working on music in general, electronic music is there's a tiny little things that accumulate into the overall picture, right? So tiny adjustments of EQ, excitation, compression, minor compression, stuff like that. Less is more or less. I think I said that a little bit ago. Anyway, this is the Exciter for Ozone 8. I hope you enjoyed. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up guys? In this video I'm going to be going over the vintage compressor module in Ozone 8. I'm going to open it up here and kind of was already going. So what this is the vintage compressor. It's a really neat way to kind of control the body of the track. The vintage compressor is not meant to be like used to extreme values. You can, but what it is it's kind of a utility to kind of ride the audio in a way that so it doesn't sound like a compressor, like a digital one. It's a good way to kind of ride out the audio and things like that. So we're going to go over, it'll look like this actually. We're going to go over a brief kind of rundown of what a compressor does. And what it is when the audio level, which we can see here, that right there, when the audio level goes above the threshold, depending on what the ratio is, it will reduce the volume automatically. So it's like someone kind of riding a fader or something like that. Kind of, you do this when like commercials blast on your TV, you turn the TV down. You're basically a compressor, like you're turning down the audio when the audio gets above a level that you are in annoying. It's like annoying your ears, so you're like, I gotta turn that down. So yeah, so if you want to fix that, just put a compressor and have that running out of your TV. So yeah, there's that, and the attack is how slow the reaction time of how long it takes for the gain to be reduced. That's the reaction time once it goes above the threshold, and this will preserve something called transients, which is very important. So if I clap, psh, right, you might not have enough time to catch like the beginning part of the clap, but you'll catch the body of it. And what that does on a snare drum, for example, is you get like rock drums and you have the attack poking through and a very high ratio and threshold. And the release is how long it takes for it to go back to normal after it leaves the threshold. So attack, release, and ratio. And the gain is, the volume after the compressor circuit, and auto gain. It will automatically adjust to compensate for the changes in level. So what that does is that kind of brings up the average level. So if you're reducing the gain, it will boost it, right? Making the quiet part sound loud and the louder part sound quieter, which is compression. Very cool. And the thing about the vintage compressor is it's just an amalgamation of different vintage compressors put together. And they've captured kind of vague, or not vague, but they've captured different kind of compressors in here. So you got modes: sharp, balanced, and smooth. Sharp would be like, I'm assuming like SSL, like let's slam this stuff. I want to capture like every single peak and stuff like that. And it really like kind of rides the audio if you're going for like 80 stuff. And smooth is something that's not as reactive, so it's more of like a tube based, and it's like gentle, and it's just a leveling kind of compressor. And the release characteristics change depending on like what was fed into it. Kind of complicated stuff going under the hood. And balanced is a mixture between those two. So think of vintage compressor as a way to level out your track, kind of thing. And you'll still have your attack, your transients there, but it'll kind of smooth things out. And yeah, just very useful. So one thing about the vintage compressors is the detection circuit. So you'd have to have like the audio running into it, and that audio running into it is not completely linear, right? It'll be kind of high passed. And that's all well and good and modeled. It'll kind of be like that. So it'll only kind of detect what's going on in here, and that'll be triggering the threshold. But this is also useful if you have, I guess, a lot of low end, and you don't want the low end to just be going bananas messing with your threshold. You want like the mids and the highs to affect that. And yeah, you can totally do that. And that's why, use these compressors in that way. They react differently than digital ones. They add a color, if I dare say. So yeah, let's go 2-to-1 ratio. I don't think I mentioned this, but the ratio, basically, the higher the ratio, the more the gain reduction, right? And 1-to-1 doesn't really do anything. So yeah, let's do that. Right, so you don't want like crazy amounts of gain reduction, but you want a little bit. You want it to kind of bite and ride the audio. And we'll go over to the gain reduction trace. Right, it's catching those peaks. We can catch a bit more. We can just bring the threshold down. Bring the ratio up. Right, very smooth. We can go sharp. We can just grab everything. Right, or smooth. Just kind of smooth it out. Right, that's pretty aggressive, but you can see the non-linearity of that release curve right there. right? So from there, yeah, you can adjust the attack and release. That will preserve your transients for the attack, and the release will dictate how fast, or yeah, how fast it takes to get to 0, and then the auto gain will kind of keep things level. And yeah, it's just a good way to kind of smooth things out. Right, and it's a compressor that doesn't sound like a compressor. And yeah, maybe this isn't the best example, but you know, it's the best I can do. Anyway, I hope you guys learned stuff. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up guys? In this video we are going to be going over the Dynamics module in Ozone 8. Dynamics is a fancy way of saying a compressor, right? A compressor is dynamic control. You're controlling the dynamics with a compressor. And this is what it looks like. It looks pretty confusing for now. I'm just going to hit this X here. And we have just a single band compressor now. It's affecting everything at once. Cool thing about this is it's a limiter and a compressor. And a compressor is, a limiter is actually a fancy compressor. So dynamics is just compression, right? That's all it is. All right, it's the controlling of quiet to loud signals and stuff like that. So let's get on with that. So you have your bands here. So we got one band. We have our meters here. So the bar on the outside is the audio coming in, and then the purple stuff in the inside is the amount of gain reduction. Right, so we're getting like 1 to -2, -1 to -2 dB of gain reduction, which is pretty cool. And that shows that. We have our limiter threshold, which, you know, is exceptionally smartly at 0.0 dB. And then we have our compressor threshold, which is over here. Limiter controls are here. Compressor controls are here. Let me jump down here. Peak. Peak is what is being kind of fed into this detection. I call it a detection circuit. This is the peak, so it's like basically what's going on. Envelope is more, think of it like an envelope follower. It'll prevent it prevents distortion in place of RMS. RMS takes the average, and yeah, envelope is like pretty useful. Let me just read this. Envelope mode behaves much like RMS mode, but with some key advantages. Unlike RMS, envelope mode produces even levels across all frequencies. There you go. Additionally, envelope mode will not produce any aliasing or artifacts RMS detection can cause. So yeah, it's just a mixture between RMS and peak. So there you go. So I'm just going to stick with peak for now. We have our compressor settings, ratio, attack, release, and knee. Knee is something new. We're going to get into that. Let me just get my notes ready. Knee is basically the compression curve. So a higher value, which would be a soft knee, is more of a subtle and I guess natural sounding compression, and lower settings is more aggressive. All right. Also, higher settings of the ratio is also aggressive. Lower settings is not aggressive, and a ratio of be upwards. A ratio of 1 to 1 does nothing. All right. So let's just double click. So now it's 2 to 1, which is very gentle. And cut off here. Same applies for the limiter. You want the knee to be pretty high, or sorry, pretty low, so it can catch everything. And there's that. So we got parallel here as well. What this does is this is a mix between the uncompressed and the compressed signal. This is called parallel compression or New York compression. Very useful. And that we have the adaptive release, which basically it automatically adapts to the incoming signal. So it basically reacts to the amount of compression that is triggered by the attack and adjusts the release kind of automatically by itself. It helps you out, which is pretty cool. And then the auto gain, you kind of want to not have on for the dynamics part, because kind of want to level everything out, but you know, it's there if you need it. Want to get that like awesome loudness. You can basically turn this into a multi-band limiter, which is pretty crazy. And then you have your gain here, or your band, which is the whole spectrum. So yeah, let's add these guys back in. Oh, you can also enjoy a readout. Right, so we're increasing the release, so it takes a long time for the compressor to go back up. We've got a fast attack to kind of grab everything. Right, and we can just kind of leave that. We can bring the threshold down for the limiter. Notice what happens? The compressor threshold comes down as well, which is pretty neat. Right, so that is squishing everything. So we'll just leave that like that. Let's add some more bands in. I'll give you more of a work, like a proper, like, what are we doing kind of situation. So I'll add 4 of these back in. So yeah, this is what I do. This is how I go about it. I'm just gonna drag it all in by default. This is the default dynamics. I'll actually solo each one of these. And you can also compare these to other tracks you'd like. So I'll kind of go through each band by hitting the solo button. And then check out this one. All right, so this one I can compress a little bit. Maybe I want to give it a bit more punch. So I will just bring the threshold. That if I want to catch more of the peaks, well, I'll just, if I don't want any transients to come through, I'll just kill the attack, which kind of smudges it. I still want those, and I still want to kind of look at this, right? And my release looks pretty smooth. If it's too fast, it distorts. Too long, it doesn't kind of reset, and it just gets smushed down. Then you get like a future music episode that I won't mention. Yeah, then the knee, if you want it more smooth, more aggressive, envelope if you want it that way. But this is a good way to kind of chill out and add more punchiness to that. So we'll just go back to our multi-band thing here. What I need to do is boost the gain now. We're getting a little bit of a gain reduction here. And I can just turn this off, just the individual module. You can turn individual modules on and off by hitting this blue button here. Right? And yeah, there's other things you can do. You can ride the low end, which is doing automatically just by having it on there, which is fine. Right, so you give it a bit more of an attack and a shorter release maybe. Give it a look to see what it's doing. Right, so increasing the attack, more of the bass will go through before the ratio or the compressor will finally trigger because the attack is lower. What that's doing is that's kind of giving the low end a bit more room, if that makes any sense. Right, smooths it out a bit more, and this is like overall kind of control of dynamics. And yeah, same as before, you can compress the stereo signal, which is everything, or the mid-side independently, which is useful if you really want to get in there and dig. So yeah, that is the dynamics. It's just another way to kind of control the dynamics of things in a multi-band setting. And remember, less is more. You want to kind of be gentle with these sort of things and not use too much. But it's an accumulation of a bunch of things that'll make your track sound something special. So hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned stuff. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up guys? In this video, we are going to be going over the dynamic EQ in Ozone 8. It's much like a regular EQ, but it's dynamic. And what does that mean? Well, it is kind of like multi-band compression without crossovers. So it's just a different way of working. And to avoid confusion and me confusing myself, I'm going to only use one band. That is band 1. All right, very cool. And for the sake of uh, uh, the best example, I'm just going to use a shelf here. So you'll notice that it has a down arrow here. That's because it's set to reducing the volume once it's gone over the threshold. You can also increase the volume when it's gone over a threshold. So this is pretty neat. So there's a few things to look into, but I'm just gonna play it, and you're gonna notice that the volume is being reduced. This white line here is the EQ part of it. You're not actually EQing anything. You're just telling the EQ where to go when it goes above a certain threshold. So this is the maximum amount that the gain can be reduced. We can also increase the threshold. So what is this doing? This is attenuating the high end. It's compressing the high end, but only this area. Then I can adjust that, you know, kind of like this. Right? And what's really cool and really useful, I'll just add another band just for fun, is you can, I guess, no, let's not add another band. This is a better example. We can go up, so we can have it kind of slope down, but when it goes above a certain threshold, the volume will be increased. That's a little bit low, so we will turn off the auto scale. The auto scale I'll get into a little bit later. Right, so you can see the EQ is dancing, which is pretty cool. So I'll turn on auto scale. Let's get another band in here. We can do another example of boosting something. Or you can have this just gently riding a particular band that's kind of going crazy. But you'll notice that the scale is changing. Let's turn that off. The attack and release are changing depending on what frequency we're in. And this is to prevent distortion, because lower frequencies require a faster attack and a release of that nature. Faster attack, faster release, just because the waveform is longer. And as you move up, it'll contextually change the release and attack that makes sense musically, which is pretty neat. So another thing you can do is kind of do this, and you can kind of control the bass a bit more on the low end. Right, and yeah, that's basically it right there. And yeah, you can do all sorts of stuff. I don't know if that makes any sense. Oh, and the knee is automatically adjusted there as well, which is pretty neat. Yeah, that's dynamic EQ, and is meant to be used kind of in conjunction with, you know, a lot of other effects to kind of stack up and, you know, smooth out your track. And yeah, it's very common. Like an example is using multiple compressors in series. So the compressor is like the compression is not as obvious. It's important to kind of have things, you know, I can't say that enough. It's like less is more. You know, it's just a lot of reduction over time will really add to your sound and make things sound really cool. So yeah, use this if there's a particular frequency that's bothering you. You know, I tend to have it around here. Right, and you can't even hear it, but there's a major difference, and it's adjusting the balance and tone of it. Anyway, hope you learned stuff. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up, guys? In this video, we are going to be going over the Spectral Shaper. The Spectral Shaper is basically harshness control. It's controlling the harshness. It's not quite like a de-esser. It's a little bit different. So yeah, let's give it a listen. Give our one band here. Let's just solo that. Right, so say there's something harsh in there. Let's just assume it's the hi-hats, and it's like something's going on. Maybe there's like a voice in there. It's like really harsh. What we can do is we can kind of attenuate that. You can also listen to that. Right, so there's that, all that harsh stuff we're effectively smoothing out. And we can adjust the attack. So a very fast attack to get rid of a little bit of it. Maybe we should leave it at 1 milliseconds. And the release is, how fast it goes back to normal. We can adjust the tone to make it brighter or darker, which is pretty cool. So yeah, let's play around with that. And this generally occurs when you have like a bunch of compression, and for example, we have like a tape or maybe an exciter beforehand. We got a lot of stuff going on. It kind of accentuates that. We can take it out again using this, and this is good for like voices, sibilants, and stuff like that. And the light, medium, and heavy, which sets the ratio. Oh, neat! It sets the ratio 4:1, 2:1, and then 1.5:1. So think of it like a compressor, but it's a compressor with a tone control, which is interesting. So that's basically that. If you got harshness, you should be using the Spectral shaper kind of near the end of your plugin, the end of your chain here. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned stuff. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up, guys? In this video, we're going to be going over the imager in Ozone 8. Now, this is something I've been using for years. Really fun. What this is this controls the stereo of your track here. So let's just take away all these bands here. We'll just have one band. Got band 1. And what this will do is this will basically increase the side material or decrease the side material. So check this out. Or we can decrease it, so it just kind of goes to mono. You'll notice that this vector scope is here. What this does is this kind of tells you what the stereo image is. And this is the correlation meter here. And this is very important. You kind of don't want it to dip below 0, because when you dip below 0, that means that you're getting some phasing issues. You want to be +1 or 0. You want to be in between here. Yeah, it's okay to go a little bit below 0 sometimes. But it's bad news bears if you're constantly in the -1. And you can also see your correlation around here. Can you? Nope, this one. Right, this is your correlation over time, +1, -1. You don't want it to go below. So what does this all mean? Okay, let's go back into our spectrum. No, I'm sorry, our bands. Let's add the bands back. Right, so we can split this up. So typically you want your lower end to be mono. It's pretty mono already, but let's just take it the rest of the way, just because we don't want any wishy-washy on the low end. Right, I'm just going to listen to this one by itself. Right, you notice how we're adding a lot of body and depth by adjusting the width. Remember, less is more. Don't use too much. And band 3, what's this one right here? All right, yeah, maybe we can get away with making that pretty stereo. Right, our correlation is still good. Right, we got a good balance here. If we, increase this, sounds weird. We can also stereoize, which is interesting. So that'll delay the left and the right. which does something that doesn't work a whole lot with dance music or with what we're doing. But yeah, it's just an excellent way to kind of create the stereo image. I would stick to a vectorscope, but pay attention to the correlation. Polar. It's pretty cool. And this Lissojaus. Yeah, I keep it on this just because it looks neat. And yeah, we can observe our correlation metering here. And we are in good shape, and we will sound good mono, which we'll check out now. Right. So yeah, that is the imager. It's easy to go a little bit crazy with this. I would use kind of less. Maybe yeah. It depends. It depends on your track. You can take this maybe 40 or 50% of the way, and then you can use the post EQ in mid-side mode to accentuate the high end further. Or accentuate the stereo a bit further. Do so subtly. That's why they give you multiple EQs, just so you can do that. But yeah, that is the imager. Hope you learned stuff. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up, guys? In this video, we are going to be going over the vintage limiter. Now, the vintage limiter is a alternative to the maximizer. It applies a lot of the technology, the release control in the maximizer, but then applies it to the analog vintagey realm. If you're into that, and yeah, basically what you get is you get the best of both worlds. You get like the magic of analog, the analog tone, the warmness, without the risk of the release causing nasty things. It's basically an amalgamation of both of them, which is pretty neat. So you'll notice that, you don't have an attack and release. You have a threshold, a ceiling, a true peak button, and then character. So character controls the attack and release times. So down here is a fast attack and release, and up here is a slow attack and release. Not necessarily linear. Depending on your mode, this will have a different kind of attack ballistic. Yeah, let's just hover over and see what it says. Type-based response with thick limiting, vintage limiting. Smooth feedback with modern precision. And then modern would be vintage limiting with increased clarity and presence. So different flavors. Choose whichever one you're into. Let's go analog because we're pretty bassy. And yeah, you basically just bring the threshold down. And with True Peak, it prevents any clipping going through. It's kind of like ISP, so it's a True Peak limiter. That's vintagey. You notice that, we'll compare it to the maximizer, but it sounds a lot more thicker and warmer, as they say. And yeah, the release is controlled kind of intelligently. And yeah, it's quite fun. It's an alternative if you're going for a certain vibe. We can get really aggressive, but yeah, that is the vintage limiter. It is the final stage, one of the final stages in your track, and there's nothing stopping you from using the vintage limiter and then the maximizer post. If you want to use them kind of in series, if that's what you're into, that's all great. But yeah, that's just another option that they've included, and you can check that out. Anyway, hope you guys learned stuff. Take care and have a good one. Hey, what's up, guys? In this video, we are going to be going over the maximizer module in Ozone 8. Now, this is the one that goes last in your chain. and it's really the bread and butter of ozone, and it's pretty powerful. And it is a maximizer. And what makes a maximizer is it makes your signal louder depending on the threshold. You bring the threshold down, it'll make your track louder, like so. Right? But what makes a maximizer is its control of the release. So an intelligent release control, because too slow of a release and it will pump, too fast and it will distort. So it kind of takes care of that for you. It's very smart in how it goes about doing that. And yeah, let's just kind of go through each of these modes. So think of these as like backwards compatibility. Um, uh, each kind of iteration of IRC has a new algorithm and how it goes about doing things. So I remember when it was like IRC 1 and 2, and that was it. Yeah, each one kind of is optimized for certain use cases. So IRC 1 provides intelligent digital loudness maximization of the signal. It does this by analyzing the source material and applying limiting in a psychoacoustically pleasing manner, reacting quickly to transients to prevent pumping, and reacting more slowly to steady bass tones to prevent distortion. Very cool. IRC2, right? What this is similar to IRC1, but optimized to preserve transients even more, so they sound sharper and clearer in the output signal, even when aggressive limiting is taking place. So keep that in mind. IRC3. Now this one's pretty cool because you have different flavors, different tonalities. It allows the most aggressive limiting by using an advanced psychoacoustic model to intelligently determine the speed of limiting that can be done to an incoming signal. Before producing distortion that is detectable to the human ear, IRC3 mode is very CPU intensive and produces a high latency, especially at higher sampling rates. You may find that the sampling rates greater than 48 kilohertz, you are unable to use Intelligent 3 mode in real time. So yeah, there's that one, and there's different ones. One that is one that has a higher propensity to pump. This is the least aggressive style of IRC3. What does it do? And will not constrain the limiter's release behavior. It can tend toward a slower release behavior and may result in pumping. This is a legacy setting, and is the behavior used in Ozone version 5.01 and earlier. Okay, so yeah, like I said, backwards compatibility stuff. Balanced. The setting constrains the release behavior of the limiter in a generally transparent way and should be suitable for most material. I would stick to this because it's balanced, like they said, and it works well. Crisp. What is crisp? Crisp is this setting aggressively constrains the limiter's release behavior and will favor distortion over any pumping. So dubstep, EDM, Skrillex music. Clipping. This is the most aggressive style of IRC3 and may be used if you wish to slightly colorize your mix with distortion or achieve the highest degree of loudness with the greatest risk of clipping. So yeah, different kind of release flavors. They're controlling the release. I would stick to balance, so let's go into IRC4. I like reading. IRC4. This mode builds upon the existing IRC technology by shaping the spectrum to further reduce pumping and distortion. As the signal goes further into the threshold, the IRC4 algorithm limits frequency bands that contribute most to these peaks. This reduces intermodulation between different signal components. For example, given vocals and drums, this algorithm can be used more selectively about limiting the transients from the drums without causing the vocals to duck as much. When there's no limiting necessary, the spectrum will be unaltered. While the typical multiband limiter has only a few bands set using crossovers, IRC4 algorithm uses dozens of psychoacoustically spaced bands in order to react to any type of audio. So essentially, a lot of voodoo going on. So yeah, this is the new thing that everyone is using. A lot of technology goes into this. Some science, some guys in lab coats making IRC4. So yeah, there's 3 modes here. Classic. This setting provides a general enhancement to the overall mix with the sound more reminiscent of Ozone's earlier limiting algorithms, which are still being used by professionals today. Yeah, I would most likely use this one just for that kind of flavor. Modern. This style also provides general enhancements and life to your mix, but with greater detail and clarity than the other classic style. And then transient. This style is optimized to provide preservations of all transients, resulting in a highly detailed overall sound that may benefit some mixes needing added clarity. So there you have it. Yeah, there's different modes. You don't always have to use IRC4. You can use 3, 2 if you're a lunatic. You know, different kind of flavors. And the threshold, you just bring down the ceiling. You wouldn't want to have set to 0, 0, maybe 0.1. Or if you really want to be careful, -1 dB. Turn on true peak. Very important. That should be on by default. What are you thinking? And that is that for that right there. Bring the threshold down. Super fun. Right, I'm able to use IRC4 without any problem. The character. This adjusts the attack and release and adds, the character of your maximizer. So this would be a fast attack and release, a slow attack and release. I usually just leave it there unless there's something bananas going on. The stereo impedance. So this will process the transients of the left and right separately. You can so it's not like compressing everything together, it's compressing left and right. That can cause issues with like lopsided like phasing. And it might not sound good with extreme values, but gentle values, sure. And the sustain, which is the release, it will kind of leave that. And then you can emphasize the transients, the ones that you've lost from the maximizing that you're doing. You might lose some transients, so you can kind of add those back in, which is very useful. It actually detects these transients, and you can put them back in, which might be of use to you. So yeah, that is the maximizer. I hope you enjoyed. Take care and have a good one.